In a world that often feels uncertain and divided, where can we turn for guidance? How can we find the strength to stand up for what's right, even when it's hard? Enter Musonius Rufus, the rebel philosopher who used Stoic wisdom to challenge the status quo and light a path to a more meaningful life. Welcome to Stoic Lessons, and today we're embarking on a deep dive into the life and teachings of one of history's most fascinating and underappreciated thinkers. Musonius Rufus may not be a household name like Socrates or Marcus Aurelius, but his ideas are just as powerful and relevant today as they were 2,000 years ago. In this video, we'll explore the profound life and wisdom of Musonius Rufus that will make you rethink everything you thought you knew about ancient philosophy. Along the way, we'll uncover timeless lessons about integrity, resilience, justice, and what it means to live a good life. Whether you're a long-time Stoic or just seeking some ancient wisdom for modern times, this video will challenge and inspire you. So grab a notepad, settle in, and get ready to have your mind blown by the rebel philosopher who dared to speak truth to power. Let's do this. Chapter 1. The most interesting man in Rome. Our story begins in the 1st century AD, in a Rome that was both glorious and troubled. The empire was at the height of its power, with conquests stretching from Britain to Babylon. But beneath the surface, social unrest was simmering. Political intrigues, corruption, and the yawning gap between rich and poor threatened to tear the fabric of society. Into this turbulent world stepped a philosopher who was in many ways the most interesting man in Rome. Born to an aristocratic family around 30 AD, Gaius Musonius Rufus had all the privileges of the elite. He could have lived a life of leisure, pursuing fame and fortune like so many of his peers. We'll see, this uncompromising commitment to living his truth would make Musonius one of the most exciting, polarizing figures of his age. He would be hailed as a visionary teacher and denounced as a political agitator. He would inspire fierce loyalty in his students and draw the wrath of emperors. Musonius would take the philosophy in radical new directions wherever he went, and though he lived 2,000 years ago, his story and ideas remain as provocative and relevant as ever. Buckle up, because we're about to meet the most interesting man in Rome, and maybe the ancient world. His comfort, even his freedom, to stand up for this ideal. As we'll see, this uncompromising commitment to living his truth would make Musonius one of the most exciting, polarizing figures of his age. He would be hailed as a visionary teacher and denounced as a political agitator. He would inspire fierce loyalty in his students and draw the wrath of emperors. He was, in short, the kind of man who made things happen wherever he went. And though he lived 2,000 years ago, his story and ideas remain as provocative and relevant as ever. Buckle up, because we're about to meet the most interesting man in Rome, and maybe the ancient world. Chapter 2. The Rebel Philosopher. Now, you might be wondering, what exactly made Musonius Rufus such a rebel? After all, ancient Rome was full of philosophers spouting all kinds of ideas. What set Musonius apart? Well, for starters, there was his radical egalitarianism. In a society rigidly divided by class and gender, Musonius preached that all people had the same capacity for virtue and deserved the same shot at education. He believed that women could be philosophers and often taught them alongside men. He even married his own slave, a shocking break with convention. Then there were his unorthodox teaching methods. While most philosophers lectured loftily to elite audiences, Musonius took his message to the streets. He'd engage in boisterous public dialogues, debating with shopkeepers and soldiers, trying to stimulate critical thinking. His classroom was the forum, his chalkboard the dirt. But perhaps most radical of all was Musonius's insistence that philosophy wasn't just an intellectual exercise, but a way of life. He believed that wisdom should be practical and livable, not just abstract theory, and boy, did he practice what he preached. Musonius lived an ascetic life, sleeping on a hard mattress and eating simple food. He thought luxury made people soft and complacent, disconnected from what really mattered. By stripping life down to its essentials, he aimed to build mental and physical toughness. Of course, all this made Musonius a polarizing figure. His teachings ruffled a lot of feathers, especially among the wealthy and powerful. He was seen as a troublemaker, a rabble-rouser, a threat to the social order. And that leads us to one of the most dramatic chapters in Musonius's life, his exile. You see, Musonius's fame had spread far and wide, even reaching the imperial court. But not everyone was a fan. In 65 AD, the notorious Emperor Nero expelled Musonius from Rome, likely seeing his populist philosophy as a threat. Exile was a harsh punishment in the ancient world, often tantamount to a death sentence. But Musonius took it in stride, using his banishment as an opportunity to spread Stoicism far and wide. He crisscrossed the empire, from Greece to Syria, teaching and debating wherever he went. And incredibly, this wasn't even the last time Musonius would be exiled. Later in life, he would again be banished by the Emperor Vespasian for his troublesome teachings. But even in exile, Musonius never stopped doing philosophy. It was his life's mission, his sacred calling. So as we can see, Musonius Rufus was a rebel through and through. He challenged societal norms, defied powerful interests, and insisted on living his philosophy down to the last detail. He was uncompromising in his pursuit of wisdom and virtue, and while that rebellious streak earned him enemies, it also won him a devoted following. Musonius's students revered him, hanging on his every word and striving to emulate his example. They saw in him a rare kind of integrity, a man who had the courage to live his truth, no matter the cost. As we'll explore in the rest of this video, that integrity is at the heart of Musonius's teachings. He challenges us to be rebels in our own way, to question the status quo, stand up for our principles, and dare to live a life of authenticity and purpose. So get ready to channel your inner rebel as we dive deeper into the radical wisdom of Musonius Rufus. Chapter 3. Stoic, not Stoic. All right, it's time to get philosophical. If we really want to understand Musonius Rufus, we need to talk about Stoicism, the ancient school of thought that shaped his worldview and teachings. Now, when you hear the word Stoic, you might think of someone who's emotionless, indifferent, maybe even a little cold. But that's a total misconception. Real Stoicism, the kind Musonius practiced, is about engaging deeply with the world, not withdrawing from it. At its core, Stoicism is about living in agreement with nature, which for the Stoics meant living rationally, virtuously, and in service of the common good. They believed that we all have a divine spark of reason within us, and that by cultivating wisdom, justice, courage, and self-discipline, we can tap into our highest potential as human beings. Musonius took these ideas and ran with them in bold, new directions. For him, Stoicism wasn't just a set of abstract principles, but a practical guide for everyday life. He focused relentlessly on ethics and how to put philosophy into action. One of Musonius' key teachings was that virtue is the only true good. External things like wealth, status, and pleasure might be nice, but they can't compare to the inner peace and fulfillment that comes from living with integrity. As Musonius put it, if you accomplish something good with hard work, the labor passes quickly, but the good endures. If you do something shameful in pursuit of pleasure, the pleasure passes quickly, but the shame endures. Another central theme in Musonius's Stoicism was the idea of the inner citadel, the unassailable fortress of our own mind and character. He believed that we all have an inner stronghold that no external circumstance can breach, a place of resolve, resilience, and moral clarity. By retreating to this inner citadel, we can find the strength to endure hardships, resist temptations, and stay true to our principles no matter what challenges we face. As Musonius taught, we have no power over external things, and the good that ought to be the object of our earnest pursuit is to be found only within ourselves. This idea of inner strength and self-mastery is so key to understanding Musonius and Stoicism more broadly. The Stoics weren't trying to avoid or ignore life's difficulties, but to face them with courage and equanimity. They saw challenges as opportunities to practice virtue, to test and strengthen our character. That's why Musonius emphasized the importance of what he called ascetic training. Practices like cold baths, hard labor, and simple living that were meant to build toughness and grit. By voluntarily embracing discomfort, he believed we could develop the inner strength to weather any storm. Now, this might sound a bit hardcore for modern tastes, but there's a profound lesson here. Musonius is challenging us to ask, how can we build our own inner citadel? What practices can we adopt to cultivate resilience, self-discipline, and mental fortitude? Of course, Musonius wasn't just concerned with individual flourishing, but with the good of society as a whole. He had a strong sense of Stoic cosmopolitanism, the idea that we're all part of a single global community of rational beings. This led him to some pretty radical, for the time, views on social justice. Musonius denounced the mistreatment of slaves, arguing that they were morally equal to free people. He urged the rich to live modestly and share their wealth, and as we've seen, he was a fierce advocate for women's education and equality. In all this, Musonius was guided by a fundamental Stoic principle, that we all have a duty to serve the common good. As he put it, the philosopher's lecture room is a hospital. You ought not to walk out of it in pleasure, but in pain. In other words, philosophy should challenge us, disrupt our complacency, and spur us to make positive change in the world. So, as we can see, Musonius's Stoicism was anything but passive or resigned. It was a clarion call to ethical action, to moral courage, to using our gifts in service of a better world. And while the language might be different, these are ideas that still resonate powerfully today. As we grapple with our own challenges, personal, social, and global, Musonius invites us to ask, what would it mean to live like a Stoic today? How can we find the wisdom and strength to act with integrity in a complex world? These are the kind of questions Musonius wrestled with every day, and as we'll see, his answers are as provocative and relevant now as they were 2,000 years ago. Chapter 4. The Philosopher's Philosopher. So far, we've explored how Musonius Rufus's rebellious spirit and Stoic principles made him a counterculture icon in ancient Rome. But it wasn't just everyday Romans who were drawn to Musonius's teachings. He was also deeply respected by his fellow philosophers, so much so that he came to be known as the Roman Socrates. That's a weighty comparison. Socrates, of course, was the godfather of Greek philosophy, known for his relentless questioning and commitment to ethical living. For Musonius to be put in the same category speaks volumes about his impact and reputation. Like Socrates, Musonius had a knack for stirring up philosophical trouble. He loved to engage in lively debates, poking holes in conventional wisdom and challenging people to think more deeply. His favorite method was the Socratic dialogue, a kind of playful but probing conversation that aimed to expose contradictions and arrive at truth. Musonius would often kick off these dialogues with a provocative question or statement, something like, "What's more useful, money or knowledge?" Or, "Is exile really a hardship?" Then he'd go back and forth with his interlocutor, using logic and real-world examples to tease out insights. His goal wasn't just to win an argument, though by all accounts he was pretty good at that. It was to stimulate critical thinking, to help people question their assumptions and arrive at a more considered worldview. Musonius saw dialogue as a path to wisdom, a way to collaboratively search for truth. This approach earned Musonius a devoted following among his fellow philosophers. His most famous student was Epictetus, who would go on to become one of the all-time great Stoic teachers. Epictetus often spoke glowingly of his mentor, praising his integrity, his eloquence, and his unwavering commitment to the philosophical life. In one famous anecdote, Epictetus recounts how Musonius responded to being exiled by Nero. As he was being led away, someone asked Musonius, "What about your school? Who will teach your students while you're gone?" Musonius replied, "The same one who teaches me, reason." For him, philosophy wasn't about any single teacher, but about the pursuit of wisdom itself. This story captures so much of what made Musonius revered among philosophers. His courage in the face of adversity, his unshakable commitment to reason, his belief that philosophy was for everyone, these were the qualities that inspired and challenged his peers. But it wasn't just Musonius's character that earned him respect. It was also his original contributions to Stoic thought. Remember, Stoicism was still a relatively young philosophy in Musonius's day, and he helped to shape its development in key ways. For example, Musonius was one of the first Stoics to really emphasize the importance of putting theory into practice. While earlier Stoics had focused on developing a logical system of ethics, Musonius insisted that philosophy should be a lived experience, a daily discipline of self-improvement. He was also a pioneer in applying Stoic principles to social and political issues. His critiques of luxury, his defense of women's education, his advocacy for the poor, these were bold and original positions for a Stoic philosopher to take, and they helped to give the school a more engaged and activist bent. In these ways and more, Musonius left a lasting mark on the philosophical landscape of his time. He showed that Stoicism wasn't just an abstract theory, but a powerful tool for navigating life's challenges and making the world a little bit better. And for the philosophers who knew him, Musonius was more than just a brilliant thinker. He was a model of what a philosopher should be. He lived his convictions, even at great personal cost. He used his platform to speak truth to power and advocate for the marginalized. He never stopped learning, growing, and challenging himself. In short, Musonius Rufus was the philosopher's philosopher, a shining example of what it means to live a life of wisdom, integrity, and purpose. And as we'll see, his example would continue to inspire and provoke long after he was gone. Chapter 5. The Exile Returns. In 68 AD, something remarkable happened. After years of exile, Musonius Rufus returned to Rome, and he did so in truly dramatic fashion. Picture the scene. Nero, the emperor who had banished Musonius, was dead by his own hand after a bloody uprising. The empire was in chaos, with rival factions vying for power, and into this turbulent moment walks Musonius, the philosopher rebel returning to the city on a mission. He didn't come quietly. According to the historian Tacitus, Musonius arrived to a hero's welcome, greeted by cheering crowds. People thronged the streets to catch a glimpse of the famous philosopher, the man who had defied an emperor and lived to tell the tale. But Musonius wasn't there to bask in adulation. He had work to do. With Rome in turmoil, he saw an opportunity and a duty to provide moral leadership and counsel. He began meeting with the city's power players, urging them to put aside their differences and work for the good of the empire. One of those power players was a general named Vitellius, who was marching on Rome with his legions to claim the imperial throne. Musonius, incredibly, went out to meet Vitellius on the road, hoping to persuade him to stand down and avoid further bloodshed. Think about that for a second. A philosopher, unarmed and alone, trying to talk down a hardened general at the head of an army. It was an act of staggering bravery, or maybe foolhardiness. Either way, it shows how committed Musonius was to his role as a moral authority. Unfortunately, the negotiations didn't go as planned. Vitellius ignored Musonius's pleas and pressed on to Rome, where his forces clashed violently with the defenders. In the end, Vitellius took the city and was declared emperor, but his reign would be short-lived. Through all this chaos, Musonius kept working for peace and reconciliation. He shuttled between the warring factions, trying to build bridges and find common ground. He even managed to convince some of Vitellius's soldiers to lay down their arms and embrace a simpler, more virtuous life. It was a testament to Musonius's moral courage and persuasive powers. In a time of crisis, he became a voice of reason, a beacon of hope. People looked to him for guidance and inspiration, and he didn't let them down. Of course, not everyone was thrilled with Musonius's return. Some saw him as a troublemaker, a thorn in the side of the powerful, and they would soon get their chance to take revenge. In 71 AD, the new emperor Vespasian banished Musonius from Rome once again. The charge was likely sedition. Musonius was too popular, too influential, too willing to speak truth to power. He was a threat to the established order. But exile couldn't silence Musonius. He simply packed up and moved to Greece, where he continued teaching and writing. His commitment to philosophy was unshakable. No emperor could take that away from him. And here's the incredible thing: even in exile, Musonius never lost his moral authority. People still sought him out, still looked to him for wisdom and guidance. His influence continued to grow, even from afar. That's the power of living your truth, of standing up for what you believe in, no matter the consequences. Musonius' integrity made him unassailable. It gave him a platform and a voice that could not be silenced. And when he eventually returned to Rome, years later under a new emperor, Musonius picked up right where he left off. He kept teaching, kept provoking, kept pushing the boundaries of what was possible. In a way, his multiple exiles only burnished his legend. They showed that he was a man of uncompromising principle, willing to sacrifice everything for what he believed in. And in a world of shifting alliances and convenient morality, that kind of integrity was a rare and precious thing. So let this be a lesson to us all. Stand tall in your truth, even when the world pushes back. Be a voice of reason in times of crisis, and never ever stop fighting for what you know is right, because that's what Musonius Rufus did, and that's why 2,000 years later we're still talking about him, still learning from his example. He was a rebel, a maverick, a moral force of nature, and we could sure use a little more of that in our world today. Chapter 6. Musonius the Mentor. Throughout our journey into the life of Musonius Rufus, one theme keeps emerging: his profound impact on those around him. Musonius wasn't just a brilliant philosopher. He was an extraordinary teacher and mentor, someone who inspired fierce loyalty and lifelong dedication in his students. You see, studying with Musonius wasn't like attending a typical school or academy. It was more like joining a tight-knit community, a family bound together by shared values and a common pursuit of wisdom. Musonius had a unique ability to spot potential in people, to see the hidden philosopher in the soldier, the scholar, the slave. He believed that everyone had the capacity for virtue and wisdom, regardless of their background or status. And he made it his mission to help his students unlock that potential. So, what was it like to be mentored by Musonius? Well, it was intense, to say the least. Musonius didn't just lecture from on high. He got down in the philosophical trenches with his students, engaging them in rigorous dialogue and debate. He challenged them to question their assumptions, to examine their lives, to push themselves beyond their comfort zones. He urged them to practice what they learned, to apply philosophy to the real world. And he led by example, living his teachings with a radical sincerity. For many of his students, this was a transformative experience. It wasn't just about acquiring knowledge, it was about forging a new way of being in the world. Musonius showed them that philosophy wasn't some abstract intellectual exercise. It was a powerful tool for self-discovery and ethical living. One of the most famous examples of Musonius's mentorship is his relationship with Epictetus. Epictetus was born a slave, but thanks to Musonius's influence, he became one of the greatest philosophers of his age. The story goes that Epictetus's master, impressed by his intelligence, sent him to study with Musonius in Rome. And under Musonius's guidance, Epictetus blossomed. He absorbed the teachings of Stoicism and made them his own, developing a philosophy of resilience, inner freedom, and moral courage. In a way, Epictetus became Musonius's philosophical heir, carrying on his legacy and spreading his ideas to new generations. And Epictetus never forgot the debt he owed to his mentor. He often spoke of Musonius with reverence and affection, holding him up as a model of the philosophical life. But Epictetus wasn't the only one transformed by Musonius. Countless others had their lives changed by this extraordinary teacher. Some went on to become philosophers themselves, while others took Stoic principles back to their everyday lives as politicians, soldiers, merchants, and more. In this way, Musonius' influence rippled out through Roman society and beyond. He planted seeds of wisdom that would continue to grow and flourish long after he was gone, and he showed the power of mentorship to shape lives and change the world. So, what can we learn from Musonius the mentor? Well, for one thing, he reminds us of the importance of seeking out wise guidance on the path of life. We all need teachers and role models to help us grow, to challenge us, to show us what's possible. But Musonius also challenges us to be mentors ourselves. Each of us has wisdom and experience that could benefit others. Each of us can be a beacon of guidance, a source of inspiration. We never know how our words and actions might impact someone else's journey. Of course, being a mentor isn't easy. It requires patience, empathy, and a willingness to meet people where they are. It means investing time and energy in others, often without immediate reward. But as Musonius showed, it's one of the most meaningful and impactful things we can do. So let's take a page from Musonius's book. Let's commit to lifelong learning and growth. Let's seek out mentors who can guide us on the path of wisdom. And let's look for opportunities to be mentors ourselves, to pass on the torch of knowledge and insight. Because that's how we build a culture of wisdom, one relationship at a time. That's how we ensure that the teachings of great thinkers like Musonius continue to live and breathe in the world. And that's how we light the way for future generations, just as Musonius lit the way for us. Chapter 7. Musonius's Legacy. As we near the end of our journey with Musonius Rufus, it's worth stepping back and asking, what is his legacy? How did this rebel philosopher from ancient Rome manage to leave such an enduring mark on history? Well, in many ways, Musonius's legacy is the legacy of Stoicism itself. As one of the leading Stoic thinkers of his age, Musonius helped to shape and promote a philosophy that would go on to have a profound impact on Western culture. Stoicism, with its emphasis on reason, virtue, and resilience in the face of adversity, would become a guiding light for countless people across the centuries. From the emperor Marcus Aurelius to the former slave Epictetus, from the Renaissance scholar Justus Lipsius to the modern-day Admiral James Stockdale, Stoicism has inspired leaders, thinkers, and everyday people to live with greater wisdom and integrity. And at the heart of this tradition stands Musonius Rufus. His teachings on the primacy of virtue, the power of self-discipline, the importance of ethical action, these would become cornerstones of Stoic thought. His emphasis on philosophy as a way of life, not just an intellectual pursuit, would set the tone for generations of practitioners. But Musonius' legacy extends beyond just Stoicism. In a way, he represents a timeless archetype, the courageous truth-teller, the moral gadfly, the person who speaks up for what's right, even in the face of opposition and danger. Throughout history, we see echoes of Musonius in figures like Socrates, who questioned the powerful and paid the ultimate price, like Galileo, who challenged the dogmas of his time, like Martin Luther King Jr., who dreamed of a more just world and worked tirelessly to make it a reality. These are the people who move society forward, who expand our ethical horizons, who remind us of our higher potentials, and Musonius Rufus stands proudly among them, a shining example of moral courage and commitment. But perhaps Musonius' greatest legacy is the way his life and teachings continue to resonate with us today. In a world that can often seem confusing and chaotic, Musonius offers a beacon of clarity and purpose. His words have a timeless quality, a deep wisdom that speaks directly to the human condition. When we read Musonius on the importance of character over status, or on the power of the mind to overcome any obstacle, it's like he's speaking directly to us across the millennia. His insights feel just as relevant and potent now as they did in ancient Rome. And that's because Musonius was grappling with the same fundamental questions that we all face. How should we live? What matters most in life? How can we find strength and purpose in a world full of challenges and setbacks? His answers, grounded in Stoic philosophy and lived with uncompromising integrity, offer a roadmap for navigating these eternal human dilemmas. They invite us to look within ourselves, to cultivate our inner resources, to live in accordance with our deepest values. This, in the end, may be Musonius Rufus's greatest gift to us, not just a set of teachings, but a way of being in the world, a way of meeting life's ups and downs with grace, courage, and an unshakable commitment to what's good and true. So as we close this chapter on the life of an extraordinary philosopher, let's take a moment to reflect on how we might carry his legacy forward. How can we, in our own way, live with the integrity and moral courage of Musonius Rufus? Maybe it's in the daily choices we make, to act with kindness, to stand up for what we believe in, to pursue wisdom and virtue above fleeting pleasures. Maybe it's in the way we face adversity, with resilience, perspective, and an unwavering belief in our own inner strength. Or maybe it's in the way we impact others, by being a mentor, a role model, a beacon of hope and guidance in a world that sorely needs it. By planting seeds of wisdom that will continue to grow and flourish long after we're gone. Whatever path we choose, let's do so with the spirit of a rebel philosopher, questioning, seeking, always striving to live in closer alignment with our highest ideals. Let's make Musonius Rufus proud and carry his torch of wisdom into a new age. Because the world needs more rebel philosophers. It needs more people who dare to think differently, to challenge the status quo, to stand up for what's right. It needs more Musonius Rufuses, now more than ever. So here's to you, Musonius, the rebel, the sage, the shining light of Stoicism. May your wisdom continue to guide us, and may your legacy inspire new generations of seekers and truth-tellers. Thank you for walking with us on this journey. And to all of you watching, keep questioning, keep seeking, keep striving for a life of wisdom and virtue. The world is waiting for you. Conclusion. What an incredible journey it's been, exploring the life and teachings of Musonius Rufus. We've covered so much ground, from his rebellious spirit and radical egalitarianism to his deep Stoic principles and his powerful model of mentorship. Along the way, I hope you've gained a new appreciation for this often overlooked figure in the history of philosophy. Musonius may not be as famous as some of his Stoic counterparts, but his impact and relevance are undeniable. He showed us what it means to live a philosophy, not just preach it. He challenged us to think beyond societal norms and see the inherent worth in all people. He inspired us to cultivate inner strength, moral courage, and an unwavering commitment to virtue. In short, Musonius Rufus was the real deal, a philosopher in the truest, most profound sense of the word. And his teachings still have so much to offer us today. So, as we wrap up, I want to leave you with a few key takeaways, some Musonius Maxims, if you will. Philosophy is for everyone. Wisdom knows no boundaries of class, gender, or status. It's our birthright as human beings. Character is king. External things like wealth and fame are ultimately beyond our control. But our character, that's something we can always work on. Challenge is opportunity. Adversity isn't an obstacle to the good life. It's the training ground where virtue is forged. Embrace it. Be the change. Philosophy isn't just theory, it's a call to action. Live your principles out loud and let your life be your teaching. Never stop seeking. The path of wisdom is a lifelong journey. Stay curious, stay humble, and keep pushing forward. These are just a few of the many profound lessons we can learn from Musonius Rufus. But the real magic happens when we start applying them to our own lives. So as we close out this video, I invite you to reflect. How might Musonius's teachings resonate in your world? What small step could you take today to live with more wisdom, courage, and integrity? Whatever it is, know that you're part of a proud lineage, a tradition of rebel philosophers that stretches back thousands of years. By living your truth and seeking the good life, you're keeping that tradition alive. And who knows, maybe someday, centuries from now, people will be making videos about you, the rebel philosopher who dared to change the world, one wise act at a time. I hope you've enjoyed this deep dive into the life of Musonius Rufus. If you found value here, please give this video a like and share it with someone who could use a little Stoic wisdom in their life. And for more philosophical explorations, be sure to subscribe to our channel.